Hello, class. This is Mrs. Chisholm coming to you today. I am going to be working some problems from from Module 1, Section 2. So from Section 1.2. I'm focused on the homework problems, and I picked out the ones that primarily give students a little bit of a headache sometimes or require a little bit more thought. That's what I'll actually be doing for each module. I'll be working out some problems because, you're fully online, so we don't meet. We don't meet in person, we don't meet virtually or anything. But I still want to try to help you as much as I can. Of course, I'm at your disposal during my office hours, and just wanting to work some problems so that you can actually go back and watch them. So I will have these links posted. I'll post them on my YouTube, and then I will also send the link out in Microsoft Teams, but you would have to add Teams, so it might be easier for you to just go to my YouTube. But either way. So we're going to get started here, and occasionally I'll go from my document camera where I've actually printed the problem, and I'll refer back to the Pearson system where the problem is actually posted in the homework. So let's get started here. So I'll share my screen occasionally. And when I'm working problems, I'll likely turn my camera off as far as me, and you'll just be seeing the problems primarily. Okay, so here is 1.2, this first question pertaining to class with a true-false question. Just take your time on that, you'll be fine. This second question is asking you about finding class with, and I think there's another part to it. I'm going to move on to the problems that I'm focused on. And my first problem that I want to do is actually number 3. Number 2 is just kind of very similar to it. So here's number 3. It says use the given minimum and maximum data entries and the number of classes to find the class width, the lower class limits, and the upper class limits. So you should have already watched the lecture videos, taken your notes, attempted some of these problems on your own so that you are aware of what I will be referring to in my video. So this first question that I'm working here wants us to find the class width. So I'm going to go to my document camera. I'm going to switch screens here. This is number 3. I'm going to switch screens, and I'm going to go to my document camera and share my document camera so that I can actually work it out. Okay, so here's number 3. And this is in real time. You can see my hand. So I'm going to zoom in a bit here. Number 3 says, use the given minimum and maximum data entries and the number of classes to find the class width, the lower class limits, and the upper class limits. So when you get ready to find the class width, this part isn't multiple choice, but when you get ready to find the class width, you will take the maximum data entry. So I'm going to say maximum number. You will subtract from it the minimum number, and then you will be dividing that difference by the number of classes that you're told to use. You will always be told how many classes you should use, okay? If this ever gets a little blurry when my hand is moving back and forth, it will clear up, okay? So the max number is 123 here for my problem, and of course your numbers are going to be different. The minimum number is 21. So even though the numbers may be different, the way we work the problem is the same, okay? And then I will be dividing by 8. We're told to use 8 classes, okay? So 123 minus 21, I'm going to get that difference. That's 102. And then I will divide 102 by 8. So let me put 102, and then I will be dividing that by 8. Okay, so I have 12.75. For the class width, you will always round up unless you actually calculate a whole number. And in that case, your answer would be that whole number. But if you ever get a decimal, you will always round up on the class width. Now, let me explain when I say round up. So we know 12.75 is, of course, closer to 13. We'll round that up to 13. Okay. But even if this had been, let's say, 12.3, I still would have made it 13. The reason you always round up for the class width is because you would rather have your classes be a little bit longer than necessary than too short, and you could potentially leave out some of the data entries. Okay, you don't want to leave out any data entries. So that's why we always round up. So even if that number again had been like 12.3 or 12.4, we would have still made the class width 13. Okay, always round up the class width. Okay, now to get the lower limits, here's what you're going to do. So when you're finding your limits, when you're finding your class limits, your first class lower limit will always start with the minimum number, okay? Always start with the minimum number. Now, your last class may not end with the maximum though, okay? That's not always the case, but it will always start with the minimum number. Let me give you an example here. If I was to draw out a chart, because this is generally what it looks like. Let's say classes here. I was to draw out my chart, and I've got 8 classes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. My first class, which is that first class lower limit, would begin with the minimum number. It would begin with 21. Okay? Now, of course, I want to get all of the lower limits, and then I want to get all of the upper limits. So the lower limits is just the smallest value pertaining to a class. The upper limit is the largest value pertaining to a class. So my first lower limit will be always the minimum number that is given, the smallest data value, basically. The minimum number represents the smallest data value in the set, okay? So even though you don't know all the data values in the set, they did give you the minimum and the maximum numbers from the set, from the data set. All right, now let's say we want to get the remaining lower limits. So starting with that first lower limit, we will take that class width and we will add 13 repeatedly every time to get the next one and the next one. So for example, that first lower limit is 21. To get the next lower limit, I'm going to say 21 plus the class width. So 21 plus 13. That gives me 34. Then I say 34 plus 13. That gives me 47. Then 47 plus 13. That gives me 60. 60 plus 13, I get 73. 73 plus 13, I get 86. 86 plus 13, I get 99. And then finally 99 plus 13, I get 112. So I now have all of the lower limits. So you will pick out which one of these is correct, A, B, C, or D, listing out the lower limits, 21, 34, 47, 60, 73, 86, 99. So it has to be C. Okay? So did I have to do this little chart here? No, I did not, but I wanted you to see how these numbers were found, okay, and how it would look in a table or in a chart, because I think on the next problem we actually do have a chart. All right, now that's all of the lower limits. Now we want to find the upper limits. Please do not make this mistake. Do not think that the first upper limit would be 123. Now, would that make any sense? Okay, that first class starts at 21. The last class starts at 112. So there's no way that first class can go from 21 all the way to 123. Not when this one begins at 112. So do not make that mistake. I swear every semester someone makes that mistake and they'll put the maximum number right here for that first class upper limit. And that's not what you do. Here's how you find the starting upper class limit. because you got to get the first one. You got to get the starting point. Just like we had a starting point here, we got to get a starting point here. So here's how I want you to think about it. Now, these classes do not overlap. They start consecutively after each other. Okay, they follow each other. So think about it. If class 2 begins at 34, doesn't class 1 have to end right before that? So think about it. What's right before 34? What number comes before 34? Well, 33. So that means class number 1 has an upper limit of 33 because 34 has to follow it. Class number 2, which is that starts at 34, has to follow that. Okay, and you can think about this next one the exact same way if you want to. If class 3 has to begin at 47, that means class 2 had to end right before that at 46. Okay, you can think about this one the same to figure out where class 3 ends, to figure out the maximum or the upper class limit for class 3. If class 4 begins at 60, class 3 had to end right before that at 59. Okay? Now you can also approach these upper limits the same way that you did the lower limits. You got your starting value. You can take that first one and you can just keep adding the class width repeatedly to get the next one. So 33 plus 13 gives you 46. 46 plus 13 gives you 59. 59 plus 13 gives you 72. 72 plus 13 gives you 85. 85 plus 13 gives you 98. 98 plus 13 gives you 111. And then 111 plus 13 gives you 124. Take a look. Notice this ended at 124. The max entry was 123. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes our class limits or the width of our classes, sometimes our classes are a little bit bigger than the number of values or the biggest data value that we have, and that's okay. Remember, we'd rather it be a little bit bigger than not big enough, and we run the risk of leaving out some data entries. So your upper class limits start at 33, 46, 59 has to be A. 33, 46, 59, 72, 85 has to be A. Okay? So that's number 3. And number 2 is just like it. Okay? Moving on. Here's number 4. This problem, you are asked to find the class width, the midpoints, and the class boundaries here. Okay? Now, when you're working through the problem on the computer, you won't see all 3 parts at one time. It'll start you out with finding A, and then you'll find B, and then you'll find C. Okay, so just know that when I print it, it shows me everything. Okay, so the class width. Now, here's the thing. This time on this problem, you're actually given a frequency distribution chart. You're actually given the chart. The temperatures represent the classes. For example, that first class runs from 40 to 43. The second class runs from 44 to 47, and then 48 to 51. So these temperatures are the classes. The frequency is the number of data entries that fit or belong to each class. So if we had our whole data set, of the whole data set, one of those data values from the set would fit class 1. 3 of them would belong to class 2. 5 of them would belong to class 3. 11 to class 4, and so on. Okay? So this is a very basic frequency chart or a frequency distribution. Some books call them distributions, some books call them frequency tables. I've seen some books call them frequency charts, okay? But it is a frequency distribution or frequency table. So to get the class width, since they don't give us the max and min number, to get the class width, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at that lower limits. I'm going to look at all the lower limits, or I can look at all the upper limits. Look at either one, and I'm going to see how they're increasing, okay? I'm going to see how they're increasing. So notice that first lower limit is 40. The next one is 44. Then I got 48. Then I got 52, 56, 60, and 64. So these lower limits are all increasing by 4. Take a look at the upper limits. Aren't they all increasing by the same value, 4? So that means the class width is 4. So to get the class width, I looked at how the class limits, I either looked at the lower limits or I looked at the upper limits. I looked at how those limits were increasing. What number was consecutively added to get the next. Okay? Now, the midpoint, that is the middle value of the class. Okay, so to get the midpoint, we have something called the midpoint formula. And that is where you take the lower limit and you add to it the upper limit and you divide by 2. Okay? It's kind of off the screen a little bit. Midpoint formula, lower limit plus upper limit divided by 2. So especially when you have a wide class or a really big class, you want to definitely use the formula. Now with these classes, you might be able to figure it out without the formula since they're rather small. For example, the first class is just from 40 to 43. So you might be able to get what that middle value is here. It should be like 41.5. But let's say we didn't see it. So 40 plus 43, because it's lower plus upper. Press enter there and divide by 2. And we get 41.5 for that midpoint. The next one, 44 plus 47, divide that by 2. We get 45.4. I'm sorry, 0.5. And you do not round the midpoints. Keep the decimal on the midpoint. You round the class width when necessary, but you do not round the midpoints. We never round midpoints. Okay, if it's a decimal, you keep the decimal. All right, the next one, 48 plus 51, divide that by 2. We get 49.5. 52 plus 55, divide that by 2. We get 53.5. I want you to notice the same value that the lower limits or the upper limits increase by, the midpoints are increasing by the same value. So the midpoints are all separated by the same class width value. All right, so that next one then you could probably guess will be 57.5. But if you weren't sure, say 56 plus 59, divide by 2. 57.5. The next one, 60 plus 63, divide by 2. 61.5. And the last one should be 65.5. 64 plus 67 divided by 2. 65.5. That's the midpoints. Okay? Now to get this last value here, the temperature, I'm sorry, not temperature, the temperatures are the classes. Then you got the frequencies. To get these last values, the class boundaries, that is where you take out the gap between the classes. So you're removing the gap, you're removing the break between the classes. Remember how we said that they consecutively followed each other, but there was no overlapping? That one ended at 43, that one began at 44, okay? That one ended at 47, so that one began at 48. Well, the class boundaries actually put the overlap back. To get the class boundaries, so let's say the lower class boundary you will subtract 0.5 from the lower limit. To get the upper class boundary, you will add 0.5 to the upper limit. Okay? So to get that first lower class boundary, we'll subtract 0.5 from 40. So 40 minus 0.5 will give us 39.5. Then for 43, you would add 0.5. So that would give you 43.5. Okay? Now for this lower limit, you will subtract 0.5, which is going to give you 43.5 again. and then you will add 0.5, so you get 47.5. So what's happening is it's getting rid of the gap where one class stops, the next one starts. Let me just do a couple more of these and I'm going to stop because you can probably hear my son. So I would subtract 0.5 from 48. That would give me 47.5 back. And I'll add 0.5 to 51 and I'll get 51.5. Okay? That one would give me 51.5 again because I would subtract and then I'll add for 55.5. Subtract from 56, I'll get 55.5. Add, I'll get 59.5. Okay? And of course, you would finish that up, 59.5 to 63.5, and then 63.5 to 67.5. Okay? So this is my first video for this class, and I started at 1.2 because 1.1 is mainly all terminology definitions. Okay? I will come back with another problem from 1.2 in a second video. Okay? All right.